We also have ethics versus laws. So laws are formally written rules about what conduct's right and wrong within a society. If we've codified it, which is what it's called when you put a law and make it an official law, we put it into the code of law, and so it's been codified. So ethics versus laws. Of course, we know ethical concepts are more complex than written rules of law, where laws are often very black and white about what is wrong or what is right. And sometimes that even becomes murky about even murder. Okay, so we say murder is wrong, but then we have, even within our law codes, we have different kind of shades of murder. Was it premeditated murder? Was it an accidental murder? Such as you were in a car accident and somebody died. So you were still maybe at fault for their death, but it wasn't something you planned, like a premeditated murder. So even within our laws, we have shades of rightness and wrongness within things about how we view things in different ways. Okay, what about at work? Okay, so we have the Ethics and Compliance Initiative. This is also called ECI. So what this is, ECI is an organization that does ethical training for organizations. They will also help organizations write policies, create training programs for their companies, and they do an annual survey to look at what unethical behaviors are you observing at work? Okay, so they've been operating since 2000, so for the last 25 years. And they found about 50% of all employees surveyed have observed something unethical at work. So we see the most common unethical practice was conflict of interest. Well, conflict of interest is going to come up again later in that slide, but really what that is that I am making a decision because it personally benefits me versus making a decision because it benefits the company. So this might be an example of I'm in charge of hiring contractors. And I go out, instead of vetting contractors and finding the best contractor or the lowest price contractor, I just automatically go to my cousin who is a contractor and give them the business because they're family. Okay, so that's a conflict of interest where I'm doing it for personal reasons instead of what's best for my organization. Okay, other things that people reported were abusive behavior, safety and health violations. Sometimes those things go together, such as abusive behavior and safety and health violations, and corruption. And we see 29% of employees reported pressure to corrupt. A famous case of this is actually Wells Fargo. Several years ago, they had a sales target to meet. And employees were told that if they didn't meet the sales targets they were given, and this was opening new accounts, that if they didn't meet the sales targets they were given, then they would be fired. And so they had this extreme pressure to do unethical things in order to meet these sales goals or be fired. Okay, an example just at the very beginning of chapter 5 is with Tesla. So Tesla CEO Elon Musk did not agree with COVID restrictions. And when the government shut down and said that everybody needed to stay home, he continued running his factory in violation. He forced his employees to come to work and said that they had to keep working. that comes into, abusive behavior and safety and health violations, and that many of his employees got sick. Also around that time, Amazon workers were starting to report that if you worked in the warehouse, you weren't allowed to take breaks. You couldn't even take bathroom breaks. And so many of them had resorted to keeping, containers at their workstation so that they could go to the bathroom at their workstation, since they weren't allowed to leave their workstation during an 8-hour shift to go to the bathroom. So other, different violations of those warehouse workers' rights. Okay, so we see different things like improper hiring conditions. So this can be things like giving favor to, like I said, like a relative or someone that hiring a friend instead of... So one example we have is that a couple of years ago, I was the chair of a search for our director of IR. And so what IR is research, so internal research. So this is the person at Warburg who takes all of the data about Warburg and then does federal reporting and things like that. So I was the chair of that search committee that was looking to hire that person. And so that meant I was in charge of interviewing, of vetting people, and then making decisions about who would be invited to campus for final interviews. Well, one of my friends applied for the job. And so what I did, if I had done improper hiring conditions, I would have just kept going as normal and maybe pretended that I didn't know them and just gone through the regular process. Instead, what I did was reported to the college that I had a conflict of interest and I needed somebody else to take over that decision, somebody else to step in and do the interview and take over the final decision, because I had known this person both personally and professionally, and I was saying that because of that I might not make the best decision because I knew them. Okay, so you can see all kinds of different things, but this one bottom line here is experience retaliation for reporting. So this is, I reported an ethical violation and I got fired, or I was harassed, or maybe my work duties got shifted, or I all of a sudden started getting the worst shifts. In the United States, this is illegal, but it still happens. As you can see, that 80% have reported that there was retaliation for going to their supervisor and reporting that they had seen something unethical. Okay, why should businesses be ethical? Well, of course, again, where research shows that ethical businesses make more money. Okay, there's also if I'm doing something unethical, I'm probably breaking the law. Okay, and when someone finds out that I've been breaking the law, I might get fined. My company is going to show up in the news. The shareholders are going to be upset. The company might lose money or business because they had done something illegal or unethical. Okay, so when we're talking about complying with legal requirements, so we have 2 legal requirements provide direction for companies interested in being more ethical. So one is the U.S. Corporate Sentencing Guidelines. So what this guidelines looks at is what are the penalties for different violations. So is it just a fine? Is it a fine plus jail time? Is it restitution, where if I stole money from a company, I have to pay everything back? Or I have to pay them a penalty on top of legal fines and jail time. And then the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, which is often called the SOX Act. And where Sarbanes-Oxley came from is that there was a short period of time in the early 2000s where we had a lot of corporate fraud. So Enron being one of the most famous, and it was also the largest corporate fraud ever in history. Of course, that is no longer the case, as 2008 corporate fraud, Lehman Brothers, ended up being higher than Enron's. But this regulation came out of Waste Management, Enron. There was a couple of them. This is sometimes also called an accounting rule. And one of the reasons it tends to be called an accounting rule is because it came down to part of the regulations of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act are directed towards accountants, accounting firms, and how the companies do their financial reporting. And that is because every single one of the companies that had committed fraud all had the same accounting firm. And so there was this, where the accounting firm had actually enabled the company fraud by not reporting it, not catching it, things like that. What the Sarbanes-Oxley Act entails are things like what is fraud, transparency regulations for corporations that trade on the stock market, financial transparency and reporting, whistleblowing protections, and whistleblowing is that when you turn in someone at your company, what these protections say is that you cannot be fired, you cannot be sued by your company. The whistleblower protections also state that if your claim is found credible and there's a significant amount of money involved, you will receive an award for reporting that. Okay. We should also be ethical to meet the demands of stakeholders. So we want ethical products. We want products that work. We want to be able to trust the companies that we are buying from. So one of the, you might even have it listed, one of the readings might be Volkswagen. So Volkswagen had a famous case, it's called Dieselgate. And this is actually, their engines didn't meet emissions requirements in the US. And instead of rebuilding their engines to meet emissions requirements, what they did was they added a device to the engine that faked the tests, that tricked the tests. Some states in the United States require a car to pass an emissions test before you can get the car registered. And so every time you go in to register the car, you have to take it in and pass an emissions test. And so like I said, they, instead of fixing the car to meet these emission standards, they added a device that tricked the test into believing that it passed the emissions test. Okay, so U.S. corporate sentencing guidelines, as I said, this creates what is the penalty. So it looks at different kind of things, such as who was responsible, how responsible were they, if it was a first offense or a second offense. If we punish them accordingly, we're going to make sure that no one else has the incentive to do this, that kind of thing. So especially where second offenses get harsher penalties in an effort to discourage people from doing that again. Okay, the Sarbanes-Oxley. So I also talked about this a little bit. So some other things. So two other things that they required was that when the executives at Enron were pulled in front of Congress to testify, all of them said that they had no idea that fraud was happening. They said that they had no idea that their financial statements were fraudulent. And of course, that wasn't the case. But one of the rules of this is that executives have to sign a yearly statement that says they know exactly what is in the financial statements and they vouch that they don't contain fraud. The other thing that it added was what was called a clawback rule, and this was if an executive commits fraud that impacts a bonus. So say I committed fraud and I got this massive bonus because our stocks were so good, which is what had happened in Enron. It drove their stock price up really, really high, and it was everything in their financial records was fake and made up. So if the CEO had received bonuses based on company performance that turned out to be fraudulent, they would have to pay back all of that money. Okay, so we'll continue this in the next video.